All right, cool. Thank you. Okay, let's quickly start. And I'm going to share my screen as well. Can you see my screen? Hopefully you can. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's start with the discussion. So hello everyone, my name is Amit, and today we are here to discuss how do we build and distribute container images, right? So develop and distribute container images, right? So this is the topic of discussion today, right? So let's quickly understand why do we need to do this, okay? And one thing which I'm assuming you guys are aware of is what is container image, right? So let me take 2 minutes to maybe refresh your memory. So let's say you have your system, right? It could be a laptop or whatever, and you want to run Jenkins, okay? You want to run Jenkins. So how do you do it? How do you run Jenkins on your laptop? So the first thing is that you would, maybe download the war file, right? So you can download the war file on the system. Then using, Java, you can run the Java command, or you can download an installable, like maybe a Debian package, and then install it, right? So you can download an application binary. Let's say we are talking about Jenkins, right? So you can download the binary, then install it. After installing, you also need to configure, right? Prepare the system, right? So for example, you will have to have JRE installed. You might need to have some other configurations and dependencies to be running. So you might want to do all that. But once that is done, your application will be up, right? So there's a challenge with this, like installing something is a manual process. And then you need to make sure that all the dependencies, like setting environment variables, getting the binaries and libraries, that all requires some effort. Okay, so maybe instead of you or the consumer looking for dependencies and preparing the dependencies and then setting up the system, maybe it's better that the binaries from the vendor itself contains all the dependencies, right? So what happens now is that any developer, for example, let's say Jenkins, right? Jenkins team is going to prepare a package, right? So they have their jar file, for example, and this jar file is this file comes from the code, right? So they have their Jenkins code base, and then they compile, and then they package the code base, and then they get the jar file, right? Which we suggested that we can download and execute. But instead of that, what they do is they take the jar file, right, put it in a package, and on top of package, they also add some configurations and some dependencies, right? So maybe they can bundle up the JRE. They can have some other configurations, right? They can have environment variables. So everything is bundled up in a single container, right? So this is called as a container image or Docker image, right? So everything is bundled in a container image, and then that is downloaded by the consumer end users. So they can do a Docker pull right? And then download this container image. And then they can do a Docker run and run the actual process of the container, which is nothing but Jenkins, right? And they can access Jenkins. Makes sense? So that's how it works. Now, I'm assuming that you guys already know this, right? Docker pull, Docker run, and all that. The question is, from where do you do a Docker pull, right? Jenkins says maybe they're putting their container image on their file system. Google is developing a lot of things. They put their container images on their file systems. Some specific vendors are putting on their file system. So it's very difficult to find the source from where you want to pull, right? So to ease on this part of the problem on how do we pull images, there is a concept of registry, right? So there are services similar to similar to GitHub. So GitHub is for sharing your repositories. Docker Hub is an example of a container registry. And the developers, the vendors, for example, Jenkins, can push their container images here. And then from here, you can just simply do a Docker pull, right? Other vendors can also push their images here for further sharing. Right. So this is the service. Now, in today's session, we are going to focus on this part. How do we build and how do we distribute the container images, right? So let's get into that discussion. So to build and distribute a container image, you need the actual binary or actual contents that would go into an image, right? So in case of Jenkins, for example, or let's not talk about Jenkins. Let's talk about, let's say I am setting up a web server, right? So I'm writing a small web app which is written in Python, right? And or maybe I use Nginx, right? It is Nginx and it's a static HTML file, right? So I have a static HTML file and I want to serve it on a web server based on Nginx. And I want my customers to also be able to run this container. And when they run the container, they should be able to set up a web server and the static HTML would turn up. Right. So how do we do that? Right. I want this entire thing to go into an image and then this image to be saved on the registry. Okay, so I want to build and I want to push the image to the registry. Right? That's the focus of today's discussion. Now, if you want to build an image, the first thing that you need is the contents of the image. So it could be the actual software contents like your files, your artifacts and all that. It could also be configurations that will go into this image. And there has to be something called as a Docker file. Use a different color. So Docker file is a set of instructions. So Dockerfile is a set of instructions which define what goes into an image. Okay, whatever you will write will go into an image. So just having the contents and ready with the configuration will not make it go into the image, right? In Dockerfile, you will say, hey, take this content, push it into the image. Take this configuration, put it into the image, right? So this entire build process is governed by a Docker file. Okay, hopefully you guys are with me till now. Now, what is a Docker file? Let me explain a bit of the Docker file structure. So Docker file is a plain text file which has several lines of instructions, right? So the instructions are in a key value format. So there is a instruction 1, and then the actual instruction, right? Instruction 2, and then the actual instruction, right? For example, who is the author? Let's say Amit, right? And what is the default command that will be run when the container runs? Let's say ls. Okay, on which port is the application going to run? Let's say port 80, right? So all these are instructions, and these are the value for those instructions. So when you will use Dockerfile to build and get a final image, all these instructions will be followed and executed. And then you will get your final image. Okay. So now to use this Docker file and build an image, we use the built-in Docker tool called Buildx. Docker Buildx. Okay. So Docker Buildx. For the Docker Buildx, the input is this Docker file and output is an image. So Buildx is the Docker utility which allows you to build a container image. Any questions till now? Let me quickly get practice lab. Just give me a second. My lab is powering up. Let's see if my lab is up. Almost there. Yes. Right. So I am on AWS, but it should not matter. You just need a Linux machine. Okay. This is Windows. I did not have a Linux VM. So let me get a cloud shell here, which is nothing but like a cloud terminal. Okay. So this is my Linux machine. And if I say Docker, I have some output, right? Now let me write a Docker file. But before writing the Docker file, we need to have a static HTML. Okay. So just give me one sec. Sorry about this. Let it go. The lab. Okay, something is wrong with the browser. Yes. Okay. So let's say I create an index.html, or let's say my index.html. And paste. So this is my index.html, right? And it says, let's say, hello from Nginx inside Docker. Okay. Right. So this is something that I want to serve as web server inside a container, right? So let me write a Docker file. Docker file. Okay. Now in the Docker file, there are a lot of instructions, as I mentioned. Now, Docker file is used to create a new image, right? But there has to be a base to start on top of it, right? So you need to start something on top of that base. So you need an existing image on top of which you can build your image. Okay. So now, since we are just learning about Docker and Docker files, I'm going to take a base Ubuntu image, right? So there are a lot of base images available on Docker Hub. I can say, let's work from Ubuntu image. Okay, so take the base Ubuntu image. So Ubuntu images will come with basic Ubuntu libraries and binaries, right? Now, on this Ubuntu image, we need Nginx. So I'm going to say run. So on this Ubuntu image, there is another instruction to run a command. So apt get update. So I'm going to update the apt cache and then apt get install Nginx. Okay. And I'll say -y. So don't ask me for permission. All right. So the next instruction says do an apt update and then install Nginx. So that's the next instruction. Next instructions, subsequent instruction will be, let's say, I say that make the working directory as /var/www/html. Okay, so this should be my default directory. Whatever happens in this container image should happen in this directory by default. Okay, then copy. Now is the main instruction. Copy the index or my index.html. So copy it and put it as index.html. So copy from my local system, which is my laptop, this my index.html, and save it as index.html in the new container. Okay, that's the next instruction. Then is expose. I will say, hey, Nginx will be working on port 80. So in this container, there is an application running on port 80. And then finally, the default command that will be executed. So when somebody says Docker run and gives my image as the source image, it should run the command. Right? So nginx-g. Now this is the default command that we have to run for Nginx. And it's very specific to Nginx. Okay. So this is the command that will be run automatically whenever somebody runs the container. Okay, so from Ubuntu, install Nginx on the new container, make the default working directory as var www.html, copy my index as index.html, expose it on port 80, and then whenever somebody will run the container, it should run this command by default. So I save this now. Right? Now, let's build the image. So I say Docker build, okay? And I need to tell Docker where are all the things that are required for building this image. So where is my Docker file? Where is the files that will be copied and all? So where are those? So those are here. So that's called build context, the path to the directory where everything regarding this build is present. So doc, I say current directory. And then I say, give my new image a tag. Let's say my Nginx Ubuntu latest. So I want to name my image as this. So now you see here, first step is, it says from Docker Ubuntu image. So it pulls the latest Ubuntu image. And on top of Ubuntu image, it is running this command. Maybe I should move to dark mode or light mode. Yeah, so this is better visible here. So first step is to get the latest Ubuntu image. Second step is to install Nginx, and then the subsequent instructions. Okay, if I say Docker images, you see here there is a my Nginx Ubuntu image available, and it's 139 MB. Now let's run this image. I say Docker run my Nginx Ubuntu. Come on. Right, so Docker run my Nginx Ubuntu. So it is going to run this container image, and it's going to expose it on a port. Okay. And if I run this, a container is running. I say Docker PS to list the containers, and you see a peaceful golden container is running here, which is running on my Nginx Ubuntu. And you see the default command it is running, Nginx-g daemon off, which is what we specified in the Docker file. Now let me open a new tab. And this container is available on port 32768. So I say curl localhost 32768. And you see my Nginx, we are seeing this application running. Okay, now I think, hey, this is pretty good. I want to share it with other people. So how can I share it with other people? Now to share it to other people, let's go back here. You need to push this image to a registry. So let's push our newly created image to a registry. So I will say hub.docker Let's call it as Docker Hub. Okay, so this is Docker Hub, and I want to push here. Let me sign in, and let's see if I can remember my password. I will have to stop screen share, and I'll start again. Okay, so looks like my password worked. Now I'm going to say Docker login on my system on which I have created the Docker image. So let's see if this works. Let me again try password. All right, so now you see here with the username password, I am successful. Now let's do a Docker push. So I said Docker push. But what is the name of the image? My nginx dash Ubuntu. So it is pushing the image, but it says request access to the resources denied. Why it is denied? So by default, when you push or pull images from Docker, it does that from a namespace or an account on Docker Hub called library. Right. So inside Docker, it tries to pull or push images to an account called library. The library is the default account where the Docker team publishes their images. So that's why it says, hey, you don't seem to have access, right? Why would I have access to the Docker's account? So now I need to change my name of the image so that it represents my account. What is my account? My account is this one, DevOps experts. Okay. So now I give another name. I tag my image, which is my nginx Ubuntu, and I call it as DevOps experts slash my nginx dash Ubuntu. Now, if I say Docker images, you will see here there was an image called my nginx Ubuntu. It was built 5 minutes ago. This is the ID of the image, a unique ID. And then I created a new tag for the same image, which is this. It points to the same image ID. So that means both the images are same. It's just that they have different tags. And I can now say Docker push here. So now this image name contains the account name also, DevOps experts. Right? So press enter. And now you see docker.io DevOps experts, my nginx Ubuntu, and it's able to push the image. Right? And here, if I refresh my page, this is the new image that is available. If I click on it, it shows me the details of the image. And this is how I can push, or with this command. If you look for this image, you will see that you can pull this image using this command. Right? And then run it. So let me show you that as well. So if I say Docker or my nginx dash Ubuntu, right, and this one. Hold on a sec. First of all, Right. So if I say Docker images, I deleted all the images now. Now let's say Docker pull this particular image. So I'm now acting as a consumer. I say Docker pull this name of the image. So Docker is going to look at the Docker Hub and pull the image from Docker Hub. Right? And now I can run it like any other image. Now, another thing which I want to tell about this is, well, this base image. So this is a decision that anyone who's building an image have to take. Which base image to use? I use Ubuntu. You can use CentOS. You can use Alpine. You can use Red Hat. So whatever works for you. Okay. Sometimes, well, it makes sense to use a pre-built image which already has all the libraries that you require. Right? For example, I'm installing Nginx here. So I'm taking an Ubuntu image and then installing Nginx so that I can run my web service. Instead of going this way, well, I could have, right? I could have used an existing image which had Nginx already installed. Right? So there is already Nginx image available. I could have just taken Nginx image. And then I could have copied my HTML file there. Yeah, I can zoom in. Here you go. Let's see. So you see here, this is the Nginx image, and that Nginx image is Dockerfile. So it is using Debian as a base image, and then it is setting some environment variables. Then it is running some commands to get things added to the base image, right? So many commands. Yes, so many commands. And then some more commands here, right? And the by default it runs this CMD and this expose. So this all things we are doing in our Docker image as well. Right? So maybe we don't want to do that. We can just say, hey, use the basic Docker, the Nginx image. Right? So I can say, well, I don't want to use Ubuntu. I want to use Nginx image. That's it. So I don't need to do this. I don't need to do this. I don't need to do this. I also don't need to do this. I just need to copy my index.html. But where should I copy my index.html? That is something which I'm trying to find out. What is the default directory for that? Maybe inside this. Right? So I say copy the index.html here. Right? And save it. And now let's build the image. And this time, while building, I will call this as DevOps experts / my Nginx Amit latest. And what it is doing now it is doing a from, so it downloads the Nginx image. and it copies my index.html here. And you see a new image is created, but you will see a difference of size, right? This image is 192 MB and this one is 139 MB. So because the default my Nginx image is coming with some more binaries and all that. So we need to be mindful of that as well. So containers are always supposed to be lightweight. So the smaller they are, the better it is. Okay. So this is, I wanted to show you. Yeah, the idea was to show you how you can write Dockerfile, write all the instructions, and then run Docker build to create an image based on the Dockerfile, and then finally push it to the registry and distribute to your customers. And now I can open for questions if you have any, and I'll try to answer them. Any questions? I'm not sure if you guys have the possibility to unmute yourself. If not, you can use this chat window to ask me questions. Is it free to upload image? Good question. So Docker Hub is free. You can upload as many images as you want. Yeah. The only challenge is those will be public images. So you need to make sure that your Docker images don't have any sensitive information. Right? Anybody can pull them. But if you want to push private images, then you need to create private repositories. You can have one private image hosted, but for further private images, you need to pay to Docker. Or you can set up your own registry. Rather than setting up Docker Hub, Docker, you can set up your own registry. There's a question, can we install Docker without root user? No, Docker does not work without root user. But the good news is there is another container client called Podman. Okay, Podman is an alternative for Docker, and you can run it as you run Docker, right? So you can just say Podman. Podman is not available, so you can install it and then just say Podman build. So as you say Docker build, you can say Podman build, and it should work. We have given minimal instructions in instruction file in Dockerfile, but image size is around 140 MB. Yes, because the base Ubuntu has some libraries, right? That's why it is letting the Nginx application work. And Nginx application itself has some libraries and commands and all, so that it works. So that's the reason for image size, not the HTML. HTML is minimal. And we provide the necessary command to proceed. Which commands you want? the commands that I executed here. I mean, these are basic, simple Docker build commands, right? So just Docker build and Docker push. So maybe I can share that. And maybe I can also share the Docker file. And the index.html. So you can use it. Any more questions which I can answer? Are there any ways to reduce the Docker image size without any impact on functionality? Yes. So there is an operating system called Alpine. Okay. So always try to find images which are based on Alpine. For example, this 1.29.1 image is based out of Alpine, right? So Alpine Slim. If you pull this image, this also will have Nginx, but this is just 12.4 MB. Okay, so if I open Docker file and I say use this particular base image, right? And let's say build. Now, if I say Docker images, we have this newly created image, and it is just 12.4 MB. Just 12.4. It's like 1/10. And if I say Docker run and this particular image, PS 82769. So my application is still working, but it is just 12 MB, right? So you can reduce, definitely. But then if you are planning to use, let's say, some sort of Nginx modules, you want to add some more Nginx functionality like reverse proxy and all, that will be missing from this image. So you will have to manage that then. You can have multiple stage builds as well, Diwakar, right? So you can create a build and then copy some files into another build. So that is pretty possible. Is it possible to reverse engineer in Dockerfile? Of course, Dockerfile is plain text, right? So you can look at the text file and see what it is doing for sure. Alpine image. So Alpine image is pretty minimal, right? You need to make sure that all the libraries are available for making sure your application is working as expected, right? So minimal image is always useful so that you can only add the functionality that you want to, right? Rather than getting all the functionality, but you not using all of them. Docker build and Docker Buildx. Yeah, good question. So Docker build was the old build system, but it never had, complex features and all that, like build cache and multiple build cache and all that. So that's why Docker introduced Docker Buildx. So when you do a Docker build now, it is actually using Docker Buildx only. It does not use build. All right. Thank you guys for all the questions. I hope this session was helpful to you, right? And if you have any questions in future, do reach out. We will meet again. I do these webinars regularly. So um, whenever you find me in the same webinar, do reach out and ask your questions, and I'll try to answer them, right? So with this, let's wrap up the discussion. Thank you for your time and hope this was a session fulfilling uh, your expectations and also making good use of your time. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye bye.